Good day, everybody. This is Joe. Welcome back to the channel. This is my Smith Corona Skyriter. I've had this machine for about a year, and this is one of those machines that I've always wanted to have. The legendary quality, the legendary typing action, the lightweight portability, snappy feel, and everything about it. I really was looking forward to having one of these and enjoying it and taking it everywhere I go to write out on the road. But you know what? This machine for the last year has mostly spent in the closet, unused. Now, why is that? That's because it's had an intermittent skipping issue that's drove me crazy. I've repeatedly taken this apart, degreased, cleaned, degreased in the escapement area, trying to just get any kind of grunge or anything that's maybe causing the escapement to hang up or whatever. And the problem is still there. Well, yesterday I had some downtime waiting for a video to upload, and I decided I'm going to tackle this once and for all. I really want to use this machine. So I sat it down here, took it apart, really studied the problem. And let me show you what I found. Stay tuned. Well, I've had enough experience working on skipping problems that I have this little methodology that seems to work pretty good. I have the Smith Corona Silent Super, still have it. That was the hippie typewriter, and it took me a long time to fix the final skipping issues that it had. But one of the things that really helps is if you do a lot of test typing, single-spaced, and just start typing. And what I did yesterday was started to notice certain patterns happening. And whenever it skips, like in this case, I'm using a blue ribbon, but whenever it skips, I try to mark that skip with a red Sharpie. And so I can look back on this and look at all the red marks, and I can see what letter preceded the skip, what letter initiated the skipping. And it's interesting. So I did a bunch of test typing yesterday, sheets after sheets of stuff like this on scrap paper, and I noticed some patterns that began to develop. So I made some notes here about the problem, kind of studied the symptom, right? So one of the things was I put the machine in all caps mode, right? Caps lock mode, and all of a sudden the skipping went away. The skipping went away in all caps mode. There's a symptom. That makes you think, why is that? Okay. Then I took the two screws out underneath the carriage, and I took the chassis out of the body and sat the chassis down on the table here and did the same kind of typing, the same action and everything, and it wouldn't skip with the chassis removed from the body. Wow, that's kind of curious. So there's two interesting symptoms, little clues right there. And then I noticed that it tends to skip more when the touch selector was set to the lowest setting. Well, that's interesting, right? Okay. And then there was another problem that wasn't really directly related to the skipping, but it was that the carriage release lever was intermittently hanging up on the inside edge of this right platen knob. It wasn't really causing skipping, but it was just a nagging problem I had to fix. So that was interesting. You start to study the problem and you start to notice things. Well, one thing I noticed when I took the chassis out of the body is that the space bar rode much higher. When the chassis is in the body, as it is now, underneath the space bar is this little arm. There's one on each side, and there's a little rubber pad down here that limits how high the space bar can rest, and it's limited by hitting the underneath side of the body right here in front of the space bar. But when you take the chassis out of the body, the space bar rides much higher, and the space bar linkage is in a different position. Okay, to remove the chassis, there are two screws underneath the platen, the carriage. This one on the right side has a little star washer, and this one on the left side. And then I'm going to pick up on the rear of the machine by the platen knobs and pull the typewriter out toward the back of the body. And when you do that, there will be two little triangular prongs that pull back out of the little slots on these brackets, one on each side. And you just pull the chassis straight back, and it removes from the body. And you'll notice now how much higher the space bar sits. It's sitting up here almost even with the front row of keys. And that's definitely going to change the position of the spacebar linkage as it actuates the escapement. So this is the spacebar mechanism right here. Spacebar operates these arms, which kind of pivots this cross piece, and there is an angle bracket right here. And I noticed that right on the corner of this bracket, the paint was peeling off. And that immediately told me a clue, which was this thing has been bent. It was bent at some time, and that caused the paint to flake off this angle. And so I rebent this arm in such a way that when the spacebar is back at its rest position with the chassis inside the body, it's pulling on this actuator arm as if the spacebar was raised up more, like that. And here you can see that spacebar actuation arm as it trips the escapement right here. So the symptoms of this machine was it was skipping after you typed certain letters, and it was also skipping intermittently after a space, so it would essentially double space. And after I reformed this bracket up here, the skipping after the space went away. And I did a lot of touch typing, which for me, like if I touch type at the lightest touch setting and try to do a really fast touch typing, I get a little sloppy with my hands, and that usually initiates an intermittent skipping problem if the machine is prone to do so. But after reforming this bracket, I was able to eliminate the skipping after a space. But I noticed it was skipping after the G and after the H, and that was kind of puzzling. And so you can see this test typing after I've bent that spacebar angle. And then I did a bunch of further test typing. This time I was test typing without putting any spaces between the words, so that if any spaces showed up, I would know it was actually a skipping, and I marked them with a red marker. And as you can see, the skipping was happening almost very consistently right after you type an H, and not as much, but also sometimes after a G. So then this is the universal bar right here that all of the type linkages hit. And you might notice there's this little linkage coming off each of these, and they're not all set to the same level, which is interesting. They're all slightly different levels. And you'll also notice in the middle, the universal bar has a thicker width to it than out on the edge. And so that affects how the type bar linkages actuate the universal bar. But anyways, I've marked in red here the G and the H. And so there is this little forked bracket on each of these. And what I did with the G and the H is I spread the gap here wider so that this top little linkage is pushing sooner on the universal bar. I did that both for the H and for the G key, which is right here. And so that seems to have definitely helped the intermittent skipping of the G and the H. Well, then I had to tackle this intermittent problem of the carriage release lever hanging up in the gap between the inside of the knob and the side of the carriage. And so you can see that narrow clearance there. This arm here that's angled, I had to bend it, reform it so that it was riding more flush to the side of the carriage. And now you can see there's a nice consistent clearance here between the inside edge of the knob and this side of the carriage. During the time that I was troubleshooting this problem, I did notice that my technique of typing, the snappiness, the quickness, had something to do with whether or not it intermittently skipped. And specifically, sometimes I would try to be so snappy that I wouldn't actually bottom the key out completely. It wouldn't spend much time at all completely bottomed out on the linkage travel. And that was a participatory cause of the skipping also. And so I've also had to remember to slightly modify my technique so that I'm snappy, but I'm also making sure that the key goes all the way down to the bottom of this travel. That seems to affect the intermittency of the problem. And so I'm at a place right now with this Skyriter that even with the touch selector on the lowest setting, the lightest touch, it hardly ever skips. I really have to get super sloppy with it. And I think the final part of that is the sweet spot of this machine, at least this particular one, the way it's set up, the sweet spot for being able to touch type rapidly, quickly, slightly sloppy perhaps, and have it not skip is a really narrow sweet spot. And so you have to watch your typing technique a little bit more with this machine than with, say, my giant Olympia SG3. I think I've satisfied myself in saying that I've fixed this problem enough where now I can take it out and I can begin to use the Skyriter for the purpose that I intended, which was an ultra portable typewriter with great touch and feel and ergonomics and everything. I really like the machine. I think, like, for instance, just the carriage return lever. I like the action of the carriage. It's light. The lever is the right length and situated right at the right height, and everything about this machine is very nice, but that skipping problem. This brings about the point, however, that I need to mention, and this will probably be the subject of another video coming up, but even the best machines, the best manual typewriters, always have some little intermittent problem. They're not completely 100% perfect. And why is that? Because they exist in the physical world and they're composed of physical parts interacting with each other, rubbing and pivoting, and they have friction and mass that causes them to be imperfect. And so with manual typewriters, it seems like there's always some tiny little issue that we as creative writers have just got to learn to get over, get beyond, get past it, and just learn to use these machines with their limitations. That being said, it's great when you can make them as good as you possibly can. Reduce as much as possible the limitations of these tools and make them into creative tools that enables us to expand our creativity, our life as a writer. That's what these are intended for. Well, I hope this was a little bit encouraging to you guys that maybe you too can tackle your intermittent skipping issue on your Skyriter if you have something like that going on. And if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comment section below. Well, until next time, stay creative and have yourselves a great day.